Hey everyone, our next devotional is What is God? It's question 4 in the Catechism. And we're looking at this question because we've just seen that the scriptures principally teach what we're to believe about God and what He requires of us. And our chief end of man, we saw in the very first question, is to glorify God and enjoy God forever. And so it makes sense to ask, well, then who is God? What is God? And we see that in question 4, and the answer is God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable in His being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. And so what we see here is we begin to look at what God is, who God is. We see different attributes being given out. Now, attribute is a characteristic, and being made in the image of God, being His image bearers, we actually have a few of His attributes communicated to us. Now, they're not exactly like God. It's almost like we're like looking in a mirror. We reflect some of these attributes of God, not fully, but we reflect them nonetheless. And there's some we don't reflect at all. And so the ones we do reflect, they're communicable attributes. The ones we don't reflect, they're called incommunicable attributes. Groundbreaking stuff, I know. So let's first look, as the question and answer does, let's first look at the incommunicable attributes of God. First, He's a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable. The idea of a spirit, it's John 4, Jesus says Jesus is a spirit. And the idea here is this, that God is a non-material, He's a non-material body. He is non-material, He does not have a body, and so we confess, so this is what the Catechism says. Sorry, kids screaming in the background here. The important thing is that when we confess that God is a spirit, we deny that God has any material substance. And the Child's Catechism puts it like this: God has not a body like men. God is invisible. No man has ever seen God, and no man ever will see God with his physical eyes. Okay, so He's a spirit. He's not a material body being. He's not up in heaven sitting on He's not up there as a physical being floating in space. He's infinite and He's eternal. We are not infinite and eternal. The psalmist writes, before the mountains were made, your hands, they formed the world. Everlasting, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You are infinite. You are eternal. We are not those things. He's also unchanging. His justice, His righteousness, all those things are unchanging. And Malachi 3 says, I am the Lord, I do not change. And now there's a question, well, what about Genesis 6, where it's the flood narrative, and it said that God was deeply grieved and He changed His mind in some translations, or He repented that He had even made man in the first place. What do you do with that? Well, when we look at those scenarios, especially in Genesis 6, we see that what has changed in this relationship between God and man? Man has changed, and man has broken God's law. Man has turned away from God, and all of a sudden, God has, because He is fully righteous, His righteousness, His justice, His holiness is unchanging. Because man's has, and it's broken the law of God, God must then act. And so that Genesis 6, God was angry that He even created man. That is a righteous anger directed towards the sin of man. He is still unchanging, but the way He reacts to our sin shows that He has to carry out His justice, His righteousness against sin. So He is not changing. Man has drifted away from God. And Williamson does a good job explaining that in this shorter catechism guide. So God's a spirit, infinite, eternal, unchangeable. We don't share those attributes. Those are incommunicable attributes. So what attributes does He share with us? What are the communicable attributes? Wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, truth. Those are the attributes He shares with us. And I say that, and you think, well, I'm not holy. I'm not fully just. I'm not fully truthful. I'm not fully wise. That's very true. But we reflect those attributes from God to us, and so we're able to reflect our desire and want for wisdom, our desire and want to serve the Lord and be holy, to desire justice and righteousness in the world. Those are communicable attributes because God gives them to man in order that we might serve and obey and love God. Okay, so we have attributes that reflect God's glory. We have attributes that are God's only and not ours. What do we do with this? Well, I think the big takeaway from this devotional is no matter how you look at it, God, since He is eternal, infinite, unchanging, He is righteous, He is just, even in the midst of where we are right now, we have a God who is unchanging in His love for us, unchanging in His plan for us, and His justice, His righteousness, they're still going on right now, even all the chaos in this world, and His love for us is unchanging. But here's the big takeaway. That this virus, that everything going on right now, quarantine, self-isolation, if you might be able to hear, being at home with your kids while you're trying to work, none of these things are out of God's control or out of His plan for you and for me. And so we can take comfort in that, knowing that He is still on the throne, He is still in control, and He is still King, reigning forever. And as servants, we still are able to serve and honor and love King Jesus and God the Father. I hope that it's encouraging to you that God's still on the throne and that there's some attributes we don't have, and thank goodness we don't, because we would just destroy the world, but He does, and He is in control, and we take heart in that.